Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. Welcome back if you are rejoining us. Welcome if this is your first time here. My name is Marissa Price. I am a social worker, healer, online business educator, dedicated to creating safe spaces on the internet for Black women to heal. And I'm so glad that you're here. I have a wonderful guest with me today, Angela Kanu, who I will be co hosting an upcoming workshop with, Healing from Childhood Attachment Wounds, centering the experiences of Black women, which we know when it comes to mental health, social work, healing, we're not often centered in these spaces. So this is kind of like a new thing that we're doing with this workshop. So I'm very excited to talk to her. But I will pass it over to her to introduce herself. And yeah, anything else you'd like to share?
I love your introduction and yeah, welcome everybody. Thank you so much. And my name's Angela Kanu. I'm a social worker by trade, and I kind of started to specialize in trauma and the developing brain. And I was a social worker for almost 30 years. And at the moment, I've set up a new coaching business, which is about emotional health. And when I talk about emotional health, what I mean by that is I mean like trying to understand our emotional landscape, trying to understand like what's going on it all in here. But
Right.
also if you think I don't know the word emotional health, what I would say to you is think about emotional well-being, because essentially when you distill it down, that's what I'm essentially wanting to assist and help mainly women to
Mm-hmm.
really understand their emotional landscape. And so I work with women around moving abroad, but the emotional element of moving abroad. We can all go on Google, we can all go on Skyscanner, we can do all of that. But what then happens when you then land and you have a lot of time and a lot of space? And, I help women to just create the building blocks to curate different types of lives that have emotional well-being very much at the center, because I believe that that's our future and I believe that that's part of our liberation. And so I also work with I also do coaching around trauma, because really that's my specialism. And doing coaching around trauma, and I also do coaching around life story work. And so the idea that our very early story and the circumstances, sometimes it can wrap itself around our identity, when in fact
Mm-hmm.
we can be carrying around very, very old stories that may not be relevant for you in this present moment. So I just work with, particularly around Black women and women in general, around unwrapping that story and looking at it and trying to see, does this make sense to me is in the age that I am? And is this a
Right.
story that I've maybe been carrying from, 5 or 6 or 7 years old? And so basically that's me. And I'm really, really happy to be here today, even though I'm
Yes.
very nervous, but yeah,
It's all good.
yeah, yeah, I'm here. Thank you
Yes,
very much.
yes. Absolutely. Happy you're here. You said something, life story work, which is what
Yeah.
we talked about before when we were planning for our talk at Exodus Summit. Angela and I spoke at a panel at Exodus Summit
Mm,
2023 at this point, on things to be worried about, things you shouldn't be too worried about when moving abroad, since we both live in Mexico at the moment. But I think that life story work is so important. Like, I've never heard it put like that, the way you described it. Like, how have you gotten to this point? Right. And
yeah.
understanding the different like things that you've experienced, things that you're holding on to that maybe you don't want to anymore. And you have the power and control to kind of let those go
Yeah.
once you become aware of them. So I love to hear more about like life story work. Yeah.
As a social worker, I spent a long period of time working with people who had been adopted, people who had been in the foster care system, and also with adoptive parents, foster carers, and also biological parents as well. And one of the things that I found in working with kids who they didn't necessarily understand their story, and I think because of the way that the brain develops, our brains develop incrementally. And so when things happen to us at particular ages, we really need the adults around us to set the scene that's truthful, that's honest, but that's age appropriate, so that the child kind of has a script. And so I spent a lot of time writing later life letters for people who had, were being cared for by, not by biological family, and that it was a permanent situation. And I would write these letters so that there would be no gap in their understanding of what's happened. Because what tends to happen when we have like interruptions emotionally very early on is that we, as kids, sometimes we will digest the story, but the story is with us as the protagonist. It's with us at the center, and that we're the reason that someone left us. We're the reason that someone spoke terribly to us. We're the reason why someone put their hands on us or was unsafe. And so we would write these letters that would be open post 18 to really make sure that the story that they had was correct, and not your 5-year-old story, but the real story. And so I did a lot of that work for quite a long time. And I no longer do social work in a conventional sense, but I started to think that I'd met so many people who I could hear the story of a much younger child as I'm talking to people. I'm like, I'm not sure that this is the right story for you. Because sometimes, have you ever met those people when they shine so brightly, but the story that they're telling just doesn't match?
Yes.
And I began to wonder whether life story work that I had done for children actually could be done for adults. And it's a form of liberation. It's taking a breath, and it's saying, well, my identity has been wrapped in all these stories, but actually, one, are they true, and are they relevant? And actually, are they perpetuating something in your life and in your relationships that's actually not helpful and not relevant to you in this moment? And so part of my coaching business is around, trying to, walk with people around the identity issue and the life story piece. And I think there is a lot of value in it, but you have to be prepped and prepared, and you have to be ready to do that work. It's a lot. We think of like healing as all like these crystals and affirmations that we have on our fridge, but actually when you get down to it, there comes with it a lot of grief and a lot of pain and a lot of not regret, but like, I wish I would have had something else than I received, and I don't think I deserved that treatment. And so, I always say, people, be prepped and prepared, and come when you're really ready.
That's key. Yeah, because like you said, it's not always pretty. Healing is not always pretty. Often it's not.
No.
It's like, tears down your face, like thinking everything's going to fall apart. And like you said, it's a grief process too.
Yeah.
Realizing that you didn't have those things that you needed and that you deserved.
Yeah. And I also think the way in which some of our Western societies are set up is that there's a lot of individualism. So even when people are approaching healing, it's done in a very like, I've got to do this by myself. And that adds to our story as Black women, that we wearing these capes 24/7. We're going to bed with these superhero capes on, and actually there is space for it to be done collectively. There is a space for, that special person in your life that always seems to get you, and whenever you encounter them, you walk away feeling nourished. And maybe those are the people that you begin to have some of these conversations with, if you don't feel at this point that therapy or coaching or whatever is right for you in this moment. And so we can look at it as more as of a collective endeavor, because attachment theory and childhood wounds kind of impact everyone, because we're in a community, we're in a culture, we're in a collective, we're in family systems, community systems, and it affects everyone. When someone's not okay, it affects everyone.
It does. It really does. Yes. We're going to get to that in a second. I want to read Glamazini's comment. Hello, Glamazini. Yes, she said, I love that. I always say you live in the story you tell yourself.
Yeah.
Mm,
But what if
yes.
you tell yourself a different story? What then
Powerful.
happens? And that's the place of
Yeah.
experimentation. And that's where community comes in to say, well, we could actually do this. We could actually begin
Mm-hmm.
to start healing ourselves of these wounds, gaining more understanding, and actually doing it as a collective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And you said something about like just the individualism that's ingrained in
Mm,
so many of us growing up in Western societies. It's like taking a larger view. Like you said, when
yeah,
one person is not well, that affects the family, that affects the
yeah,
community. Like it has a ripple effect. It's not just us living isolated lives, like we're connected to each other. So that's very important.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And we play different roles. I mean, I'm Angela, but I could also be a wife, a mother, an
Yeah.
employee, a friend, an acquaintance, a neighbor, a
Yes.
community member. I could be all of these things. And when I turn up like really out of sorts, it's like, people's emotions are contagious. It's like when someone's laughing, it's
Yeah.
contagious. And
It's
so
true.
also when someone's not feeling really good, it's contagious. Think about toxic workplaces.
Ooh.
When
Yep.
your boss comes in like they've got out the wrong side of the bed.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's an English expression. It means that
Oh, we use that too.
oh, you do. Oh,
Yeah.
fabulous. So when you're
Yeah.
out of sorts and you go
Yeah.
and you're in a leadership role at work, it affects your whole team, affects your whole building.
Yes. It does. Ooh, don't I know? Don't I know? Yes. But yeah, getting to our workshop coming up on the
Mm,
23rd, which you can register for, bit.ly/healing attachment wounds. I would like to ask you,
mm,
just in your own words, what childhood attachment wounds means to you, because it can be like this really huge term that maybe not all of us
mm,
even know what it means, what attachment means, how you
mm.
can be wounded by not having a secure attachment in your
Yeah.
earliest years. So I just love to hear from you what that means to you.
I'm going to break it down in lots of different ways. And essentially, attachment is the way in which you relate to other people.
Yeah.
It is about our external relationships. And obviously, childhood is childhood. And a wound is just that, it's an injury that has an impact. And the thing about childhood attachment wounds is that um, they occur at a point in our development when our brain has very little memory. So memory is just being developed. And so the reason why the wounding is so can be so impactful for people is because you may not have memory of it. You may not have physical memory of it, but your body keeps score. Your body knows and can feel certain energies. There is loads of research around how babies respond in utero. They're responding to energy, they're responding to music. So equally they're responding to adverse events, adverse environments. Think family violence, all
Hmm.
of that stuff. There's research to show now that like babies, like, they're not just connected via an umbilical cord in terms of being fed,
Right.
they're actually also ingesting an environment. And
Hmm.
so when you're talking about wounding that happens in early childhood where there's no memory, it means that it's very elusive, and you have to be a detective sometimes to kind of figure out why you feel such strong emotions in relationship. And one of the things about our relationships is that they're a mirror.
Ooh.
And
Yes.
our early attachment styles, we have no say in that attachment style, and we adapt to whatever our caregivers give us. But
Hmm.
actually it's then a lens that we look at all relationships throughout our whole lifespan. And that's
Mm.
why it's so critical to really get to the nuts and bolts of like um, healing some of that stuff. It will color all of your relationships. Without
Right.
intervention, it will. And in the workshop, we talk about the history of attachment and the
Hmm.
psychologists that were involved in this kind of movement around
Right.
parenting. And but for here, what I would say is that um, we the idea of attachment theory is that we
Hmm.
replicate that very first engagement that we have with our caregivers, and we enact it in all of our relationships through all of our lifespan, unless it's interrupted, unless we gain knowledge and understanding about how to, one, be the detective, because obviously these things, as I said, have happened at a time when your memory is only just
Hmm.
developing.
Right. Right.
And so for me, childhood attachment wounds are, I believe that resolving some of that is a true place of liberation. And, you know, I'm sure we'll go on to talk about like why this is so important for us in the Black community, for Black and Brown people, for Black women in particular.
Yeah.
But it there are some key things here that can really nourish and enrich our lives.
Mm. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. And like you said, we replicate. So those
Mm,
earliest experiences that really like our
mm,
survival was dependent on how we attach to our caregivers. It's like seeing those and just being in the material over the past like month or so as we've been planning for this workshop, realizing how often they've shown up in like the relationships that I've had throughout my life, right? I can link those directly back to how did I attach to my
mm,
caregivers, right? What were the issues going on and how am I seeing that replicated in workplaces, right? In overworking, which is a whole different thing about how attachment wounds show up in the workplace, right? In
yeah,
toxic jobs, overworking, people pleasing,
yeah,
taking things that you know that you don't deserve because you don't think that anything is better out
yeah,
there, right? That can be linked all the way back to our earliest experiences. So
yeah.
that's real. Yeah.
And also critical in, obviously in the workshop, we go through all the different attachment styles, but critical in some of the insecure attachment styles is a concept about worth, is your
Yeah.
concept of self-worth. And if you think back to, you know, your attachment style is being developed between birth and 3 years old.
Hmm.
So, you know, your sense of, if your sense of identity is wrapped in your sense of worth and how you attach to other people,
Hmm.
I mean, really, this is stuff that I feel I'm so happy to be sharing in this workshop. And I mean, it's an introductory workshop because obviously this is a whole
Right.
lifetime's worth of like
Yes.
exploration and digging up. So don't feel that you're going to come to the workshop and we're just going to spoon feed you everything that you've, you know, gonna need for the next 40 years. But
Yeah.
it's a landing point. It's a jumping off point for us to begin this healing journey.
Hmm. Yes. Agreed. Agreed.
Mm,
And yeah, we'll get into like how attachment wounds, right? As Black women, thinking about all of the intersectional oppression that we experience, right? Race, gender, sexual orientation, disability, right?
mm,
Um, just all of these compounding on
yeah,
us. And I would love to know just like how attachment wounds manifest given that, given what we experience on a day to day basis and the larger structural issues at place, right? That we're
yeah.
trying to survive. Yeah.
In the same way, very a few minutes ago, I said that we don't play any part in the attachment style that we receive from our caregivers, but
Right.
neither did they. Our caregivers neither did they. So what
Yes.
I would say to you is that attachment styles can actually be generational.
Yeah.
And so when you're
Mm.
talking about historical events that separate families, separate people
Yes.
from their own continent, language, you know, parenting styles, um, and actually you wrap that person in trauma that is
Yes.
around, being forcibly taken from your community and taken
Yeah.
somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
actually, a lot of intentional things that are done to kind of make you a robot to work for
Yes.
capitalism, you know.
Yes.
Look, I don't think I have even enough time to do this topic in itself justice. I
Yeah.
really don't, because actually what you do is you not only strip down communities and
Yes.
countries, but you
Yes.
strip down the attachment style, and you
Yeah.
actually serve people an attachment style that really by being implanted somewhere else with so much brutality and generational trauma, you actually give them a different attachment style.
Yeah. Ooh. Yeah. And we've talked about this a little bit, right? With our
Mm,
workshop, thinking like this is probably going to be a whole other workshop because it's so
yeah.
deep.
It,
Thinking,
it,
yeah, thinking,
it deserves its own, it deserves
mhm,
its own space, because I don't think that I can do this subject justice here. There's
right.
so many levels and layers to it. But I would
Yeah.
definitely say that because it is generational, you're taking your parenting style down all the generations. And so for me, something like this workshop, it has the potential to break a chain, has a
Yeah.
potential to break a generational pattern, just by awareness, just by knowledge, and just by, like, being honest, and just by going, look, this is really painful, but we need to do this, we need to
Right.
delve deep. And I
Mm.
think, again, in terms of racism, white supremacist thinking and structures and structural things,
Yes.
look, I think we have to pat ourselves on the back. The fact that
Mm-hmm.
we are here, we have survived attachment patterns from our families, our caregivers, but
Ooh.
also structurally. Because
Yes.
you think about,
Mm-hmm.
people who were forcibly enslaved, but you also, second
Yes.
part of that equation is the people that were left behind, grandmothers who lost grandchildren, sons, daughters, wives, husbands, siblings, uncles, aunties, cousins, elders, leaders, the birthing women, the healers, all of those
Yes.
things. And for me, when I look at attachment and I look at it kind of systemically and I look at it structurally, I ask the question, who's missing? Who's missing in this picture? And you can do that in a macro sense in terms of families, but you can also do that for communities. So
Mm-hmm.
you have two sides to that equation. And so for us as Black and brown people, like, there is a lot of detective work to do. There's a lot of digging up to do. Some of it's not ours,
Right.
but
Yeah.
if we're the ones with the filters on, experiencing, like, difficulties in our relationships and patterns, then we can be accountable for, trying to curate a beautiful life.
Mm. I love that. Yes. Accountable
Yeah,
for curating a beautiful life. Yes.
yeah, yeah.
And I think as social workers, we have that advantage, right, to see the larger systems at play, right? When
Mm,
we talk about colonization, the impacts of
mm,
that on attachment, like you said, enslavement, right? As the descendant of people who were enslaved, like I carry that within me, within
yeah,
my DNA, within my family system. Like those
yeah,
wounds still show up, so
yeah.
they don't go anywhere.
No,
Anywhere. And when you bring your awareness to that, that's huge. Like you
it
said,
is
you're
really huge.
stopping like generational trauma
Mm,
by just bringing your awareness to how it's affecting
yeah.
you, right? Impacting like future generations. Yeah.
But also when you think about the impact of poverty or the impact of things
Ooh,
like, mass incarcerations, who's missing?
who's
Who's
missing?
missing?
Yeah.
There are people whose roles are desperately needed and they're missing. So they add stress to households, they add stress to communities. And that's where we've, in the Black community, Black women have developed the cape mentality. They're wearing the cape of superheroes.
Mm. Yeah.
when really we were just born to frolic in the world. We weren't
Yes.
necessarily meant to take on everyone, everyone's
No,
things. We
everyone's
weren't meant.
no,
No,
no. We weren't. We
we were
weren't.
not.
Yeah.
We
Ooh.
were not. And if this workshop and the series of workshops that will come out of it just at least open the door to the fact that, there is something that we can reach towards to break some of these things in our families, then I'm happy with that.
Mm-hmm. That's
I'm
life
happy with
changing.
that.
That's life changing right there. Yeah. Yeah. The educator says,
Mm.
yes, my grandmother always talked about generational trauma, but I didn't know it then. Yeah.
Mm.
That's huge. That's
Yeah,
huge. I mean,
yeah,
and even getting kind of into the field of epigenetics, which I've been touching on recently, it's like trauma really like lives in our DNA and it's passed through generations. So
yeah.
that is real. Yeah.
And so in the workshop, one of the things, obviously, because we recognize that, one of the things that we
Yeah.
do in the workshop is there are certain attachment styles that are by nature detached from the physical body. And
Yeah.
there are some attachment styles that are primarily here in the thoughts, in the head.
Right.
And so we in the workshop, we're just going to give some tools to help to bring people with those attachment styles back into their bodies, like practical things. You will have a resource list, you will have a lot of things that you can put your hand to when you feel able to, start this journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I know like the term that you've mentioned before, and we've carried this throughout planning the workshop, is liberation, right? That's
Mm,
our ultimate goal. So that you have the knowledge and information to move forward and kind of structure your life
yeah,
differently and seek out different people, maybe, right?
yeah,
Who don't trigger those wounds. That's huge.
yeah.
That's breaking cycles right there. Yeah.
If you know that your attachment style has the pattern of leading you into relationships where they're
Yes.
either one sided or where you feel like you're drowning or you feel like you need to run away or you feel completely chaotic and disorganized, well, what would happen if you brought your conscious mind to it and was like, I know that if I attach myself and allow this person into my life to create a meaningful, intimate relationship,
Mm-hmm.
I know that it might take me down a path that actually is not going to be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
It will not be helpful, and those relationships may not be nourishing. And I'm not saying that you should, just discard your relationship, but there
Right,
maybe
right,
needs to, in awareness, then there also can be communication. And that's one of the things that
right.
we're going to look at is how to communicate with somebody else of a different attachment style that
Yeah.
corresponds to yours. How do you begin to have those conversations?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
because at the end of the day, you want to be free, and so does that other person. And so, how do you get there? And some of it is communicating. No one's telepathic, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
about communicating some of that and
Right.
seeing where you get to with that. So, yeah,
Yes.
I'm so looking forward to this
Me
workshop.
too. Me too. Yes, yes. But yeah, I wanted to ask you just for people who may not know, right? Some common wounds, how they may show up for people who may not even realize that they're dealing with an insecure attachment style and just kind of operating, thinking, why do I keep attracting these same types of relationships, these same types of people when they're really not fulfilling to me? Why do I
Mm,
keep feeling the need to not have boundaries, right? For a lot of us, that's the case. So just like, how do they show up? How do these wounds show up in just everyday situations, everyday life, relationships of any type?
each of the insecure attachment styles and actually secure attachment is like on a spectrum,
Hmm.
and it's so it really is dependent on the actual care that you've been given by your caregivers. But what I
Hmm.
would say is that there are kind of some archetypes that I would
Hmm.
say, and I definitely, in terms of someone who may have an anxious attachment style. They
Yeah.
might be the people that you notice, they walk into a room and they read the energy of everyone. They're picking up the
Yes.
cues of everybody because there is a story to that in the attachment
Yeah.
story. There's a story, there's a reason why. And it's
Yeah.
because that's the way that your attachment style has allowed you to adapt.
Right.
And it's not that, don't think of it like being broken. It's actually your survival mechanism,
Yeah.
because maybe as a child you needed to read the emotional, you needed to take the temperature of your caregivers so that you could get what you needed. And
Mm-hmm.
so, the people pleaser might also be in that category. The people who maybe don't always articulate their truest feelings. And obviously,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to do that in every situation, but where
Right.
it matters, in
Yeah.
intimate relationships, maybe where um, you may be abdicating. You may be, abdicating and just allowing someone else's wishes and feelings to supersede yours, to be
Yeah.
prioritized over yours. And that's some of the things, some of the archetypes that you'll find in someone who maybe has an anxious attachment style. And it goes
Mm.
into the workplace. It's that person who
Yes.
may not have the best boundaries around their time, around tasks, around allowing people to talk to you in any way. We've
Mm-hmm.
all had those
Yes.
coworkers where you're just like, you're just willing for them to assert themselves and advocate for themselves, but sometimes
Yeah.
that's missing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then we've got like our people who are avoidant. And the archetype for that is, in intimate relationships, have you ever dated someone where they kind of love bomb you in the beginning and they're very like, oh, you're the best thing since sliced bread. I don't know if that's like an English-ism, but
No.
it means that you're the best of the
Yeah.
best, and then they begin to pull away and they ghost you. That's an
Yes.
avoidant attachment style because they get activated in relationships. So they do this
Mm.
push and pull, and then they begin to, because it's like they need air. They
Right.
need to detach so that they don't get swallowed up by someone else's emotions. They don't
Mm.
disappear. They're trying not to disappear, and so they need to draw back. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and there are other, insecure attachment styles that we'll actually go through in the workshop. And you'll find that some of the attachment styles have a natural affinity to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
Yes.
very interesting, like in the run up to this workshop, by chance, I seem to be having a lot of conversations. I seem to be listening to a lot of people talking to me about unbeknownst to them, they're actually talking to me about the affinities of certain attachment styles that are coming together in
Mm.
relationships and the
Mm-hmm.
adjustments that maybe kind of need to happen. But yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes. 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 So y'all got to check it out at the workshop. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited though, because we're gonna get into that.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
something else I thought about, just thinking about like as Black women, how we're socialized in this society when it comes to like having an anxious attachment, feeling like we can't stand up for ourselves because when we have in the past, maybe it didn't go so well, right? Just the ability to advocate for ourselves and how the larger structures of anti-Blackness, sexism, misogyny like play into how we're showing up in relationships, how we're showing up in the workplace and personal relationships. So I don't necessarily have a question, but yeah, that thought just came to mind just listening to
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
I do think that there is something to be said around, obviously we all know, the angry Black woman, these kind of
Stay.
conversations, but
Yes.
also how vulnerable as women sometimes we can be physically, particularly in intimate relationships. And
Yeah.
so sometimes not speaking up is about safety. Sometimes because
Yes.
you know who you're dealing with in that partnership. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes in the workplace, maybe not speaking up because you know there might be retaliation. You
Yes.
know that, you need this job in this moment. And so you're just like, yeah, whatever,
Yep.
say whatever. And so some of
Yep.
it is about vulnerability and some of it is about keeping yourself safe. And
Mhm.
attachment styles and attachment wounding, is something personal to us, but it
Right.
doesn't always cover what's happening. It doesn't cover all of what's happening in our cultures and in our communities and in our societies. There are other things that are intentional around the way in which certain people are um, given things or not given things, or allowed access or
Yes,
not allowed access. So
that's
so
true.
there's lots of things all going on at the same time. But obviously for us, because relationships can be a mirror, and actually a great
Yes.
source of dissatisfaction and a great source of grief and pain, that's a great landing point to begin to start looking at, well, how have I been wounded? What's my story, and how does that play out in my relationships, and do they feel nourishing? Do they feel satisfying? Do I feel
Right.
that I have agency and I can advocate for myself? All of those things.
Mm-hmm.
All of
Very
those
important
things.
questions. Yeah. Yeah. And once you have your
Very.
like the awareness of that to even ask
Mm,
yourself those questions,
mm,
that's huge. Because a lot
it
of us
is.
are just operating in survival mode day to
Mm,
day, not even having time
yeah.
to really probe deeper. Like, why do I keep entering back into these? Like, why am I not able to stand up for myself? And it's like you're dealing with systems of oppression, first of all, and then how they show up in interpersonal relationships.
Yeah.
That's huge. Yeah.
So what happens when you don't have time and space? What happens when you're working all the time and you're a parent and you're all these things to all these other people, and time is not something that you have in that moment? Like, you can just be unconsciously doing these things without even thinking about them, because you don't have the space and time to really sit and go, does this feel good? Is this good for
Mm-hmm.
me?
Yeah.
And where can I pivot?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ooh. Yeah. That brings me to a question, but I do want to get to a comment I see here. Umi Speaks says, do remember what safety feels like, true feelings of safety. That's huge. That is a great question because a lot of us have not been in safe environments
Yeah.
before, right? So that's real. That is real that we even remember what safety feels like. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And obviously, if your story and your early childhood story has a lot of adverse events and difficulties and
Yes.
challenges, there are some people who have never felt safe.
Never. Mm-hmm.
There are some people who have not had have not had the pleasure of that experience.
Right.
And I want that for them. I really,
Mm-hmm.
I really want that for them.
Yes. Me too.
And I want that for me, and I want that for you. I want that for everybody.
Yes. Yes. Safety.
Mm.
That's important.
Yeah.
That's important. Yeah. This comment from Global Granny Anita. Hello. Yes, it sounds like something that needs to be more than one workshop. Any thoughts on this being more? Yeah, we have talked about that. Making this kind of a series as we've been preparing for this workshop, realizing that there are so many avenues to go down when it
Mm.
comes to this topic, and thinking about the larger systems of oppression, how they show up, just how attachment wounds show up in interpersonal workplace relationships. Like there are so many avenues we could go down. So I think that's something that we're discussing at the moment. But
Absolutely. And hi,
yeah,
Anita.
yes,
It's lovely to see your face, Anita. Yeah, yeah, totally would second what Marissa has said. There is a
Mhm.
lot of information, I think, as a social worker and someone who has done research and lots of stuff into early childhood trauma and the developing brain. I think there is probably scope for me to share not just the structural stuff, but also some hacks around how we can utilize hormones.
Yes.
how we can hi Anita. How we can utilize hormones, and how
Yeah.
sometimes when you don't have the awareness of how your body and how your body is set up for you to survive. I mean, in the deepest, most solid way possible. And in the workshop, we talk we talk a little bit about the role of oxytocin and
Hmm.
how the body kind of, I want to say conspires, but that sounds like a negative word. It is about your survival. And
Yes.
I would love to do a workshop on how we can use our hormones to be able to deal with things like anxiety, sleep, to kind of when we get overwhelmed, in the
Hmm.
moment, some of the practical things that we could be doing on a daily basis that really can help us to have some mastery and not feel like we're being led by these feelings that, like we said in the very beginning, your attachment
Hmm.
style is, developed between the ages of 0 and 3, where a place where you have no memory.
None. Yeah.
So we can feel like we're being hijacked by our emotions, when in effect, they're just saying, look, the body has a memory of it. You don't, but this body has a memory. And I would
Hmm.
love to be able to do a workshop on, you know, giving those hacks, giving those tips to people. When you're feeling this is what your body's doing to help you to adapt. But this is the
Yeah.
hack that you could do to help you so that you don't feel like you're being, like I said, hijacked.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, and even going into like self sovereignty, right? Having the
Mm,
ability to bring your awareness to what's going on, but also feel like you have agency in it,
mm,
in kind of in pivoting, like you said. And we'll get into like strategies and approaches for healing. But you have agency, you're not powerless.
no.
And the more that you can bring your awareness to what's going on in your body, right? Bring your conscious awareness to that, you have the ability to, you know, take a different course of action.
Yeah. You give yourself an opportunity to create something different.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not just for you, that's for the people around you. That's if you are a parent, if you are a friend, if you are a colleague, if you are all of these things. And not because you have to help anybody, just by changing you can change lots of other things too.
Mm, changing you. Mm,
Yeah, the way that
yeah.
you show up.
Mm.
Yeah.
And that's why I
Yeah.
think it's like it's so important to put ourselves, our well-being first, right? Because how we feel, how we interact in the world has a ripple effect. Especially a lot of us are like leaders in our families, leaders in our communities. So if we're not showing up
Mm,
fully present,
mm,
that's going to impact so many people. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So there are a number of workshops that we are going to share, because I think we've just got a wealth of knowledge that I think is going to be is not I think is actually going to be really useful for us. And this is really about liberation, like on
Hmm.
in a different way. It's not a physical liberation, and that's the reason why I'm an emotional well-being or health coach, is because I
Right.
think that we need to, when we understand our landscape and we have some sort of emotional literacy, I just believe that there is a richness that comes into our lives, and there's a nourishment that we can have in our relationships, and it not just our relationships with other people, but our relationships with ourselves.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. That is
Hmm.
key. Yes. So sign up for the workshop, y'all. It's on Tuesday, January 23rd at 7 p.m. Eastern, but healing from childhood attachment wounds, which we're
Hmm.
collaborating on. And hopefully
Yeah.
this is the first of many to come. So yes, yes.
Stay tuned.
Um, stay tuned. Yes. I do want to ask you just like, yeah, healing strategies, right? Approaches for how to look at attachment wounds so that you don't feel like this happened to me and that's it. I just have to, operate with this my entire life and not have any agency or power over what relationships I choose, how I operate in the world, um, how we take our power back. Basically, I guess
Mm,
that's my question when it comes
mm,
to healing from these types of wounds.
mm. I do think that, I mean, I would approach this question in two ways. One is the body is really important. So some of the practical strategies that we'll give in the workshop is actually about returning to the body. The body is always giving us a signal, whether it's that thing in your belly, that tingling in your head, the tightness of your jaw, or your body's constantly giving you signals. And I think that when you engage in activities that engage your body, it's easier to listen to it. It's easier to hear what your body is saying. And I think those are some of the strategies that um, we're gonna go into in the workshop. But also, there is a place for experimentation, like that you could actually be posing yourself questions. And you know for it, I'll give you an example. Someone who might have an anxious attachment style and they attend this workshop, you could have the freedom to actually go, well, what would happen if I utilize the word no? What would happen if I started to experiment with the word no, or I started to experiment with getting really honest with people about how I'm really feeling in the moment without, sometimes people who have an anxious attachment style, they might get really angry and like they give you the blah, but then they're trying to sweep it up at the end, trying to make it all nice. At the end,
Yes.
it's like, I've gotten to the end of my tether, but I now need to make it all better. And so,
Yes.
so
Mm-hmm.
the having the liberty to actually say, well, actually, in 2024, I'm going to experiment with the word no. When my boss calls me and says, I'm going to have to stop you from going on your leave, you might then go, well, this could be a place where I could advocate for myself. Or actually, I need you to work an extra half an hour later when you've actually got something important to do. And as an anxiously attached person, you prioritize your boss's needs over your needs. And so you could experiment with these different ways of being and different ways of thinking. And I think that sometimes those are very simple strategies that are personal to you. Not every anxious person is going to have an issue with no, but you
Mm-hmm.
might have an issue with something else.
Right.
And so I think that dependent on what your attachment style is, I suppose it kind of depends on kind of what practical strategies you would use. Like maybe for someone who is avoidant, who I said, sometimes they live here. The conversations
Yes.
they're having is here. And
Mm-hmm.
so, so then naturally you might think then that actually maybe affirmations might be good for them. you know
Mm-hmm.
Getting
Yeah.
into the body, using breath work, using types of
Oh,
yoga to actually
yes.
center yourself so that it's not all happening here, that
Mm-hmm.
the activity of your life is not just here, it's in all of you. So there's a greater distribution of the brain and the body working together. So using affirmations,
Mm-hmm.
using, like I said, stuff that's around embodiment, being in the body before you make a decision, before you run away, before you um say that thing that is going to push that person away.
Yes.
You just decide, I'm going to do something physical first before I have that conversation, before I or I'm going to go and to the fridge and look at that affirmation
Yeah.
before I say that thing that maybe is going to like make people pack their suitcases and leave.
That's key. Yeah. Kind of having like a proactive plan of action once you have an awareness of which attachment style you may be operating in, right? Taking a proactive plan, right?
You're
Which you also do in your emotional health coaching business, which I'd love to talk about. But like having a
absolutely.
plan of action before you even get into that interaction with someone, knowing how you might respond and preparing for it. There's a lot of power that lies in that. Yeah.
There is.
Yeah.
There is a lot of power. And when it's not, you're not going to get it every time 100%. But
Right.
then when you do get it, like there's a sense that like I have mastery over my own life. I have
Mm-hmm.
mastery over things that I have no control over, i.e. my attachment style. But actually at this age and at this stage, I can gain mastery over it, and I can feel confident, and I can essentially, it's about getting what you need.
Mm, getting what you need. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Just read a comment from Uni's
Yeah.
boundaries are a game changer. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Someone who has struggled, continues to struggle
Mm.
with boundaries. They are. Once you're able to get past that initial discomfort of establishing boundaries, it's like you have the power. The power that you have, like, kind of opens up to you, like, oh, I can say no. I cannot
Yeah.
do something that I don't want to do. And then you have more energy to pour into yourself, to pour into the things that actually, bring you joy, rather than saying yes to everything that comes your way. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
one of the things that I've noticed
Yeah.
is, I mean, I think probably all attachment styles learn about boundaries, even those who are securely attached. And that's like meant to be like the holy grail of being securely
Yeah.
attached. But I think that sometimes when you say no, or you say what you really need, it's beautiful that sometimes the universe steps in and it becomes like a jigsaw puzzle. So you
Yeah.
then begin to feel that, oh, it's not a bother for me to say how I feel. And the
Hmm.
universe will sometimes confirm and go, you say, oh, someone, says, can you come over at 5 o'clock? And they're just like, no, at 5 o'clock, I need to do something else. You ruminate over it for the day and then call the person back and go, oh, I actually can't do that. And they're like, no worries, something else has come in, something else has taken its place, and I can't do
Right.
5 o'clock anyway. So when you begin to experiment with boundaries and saying no and saying what you need, maybe as someone who's anxiously attached, sometimes the universe comes to confirm that it's
Mm.
no big deal for you to say,
Yeah.
to ask for what you need. The world is not going to fall down. And actually,
Hmm.
you then get into this kind of like, oh, there wasn't a bad consequence for that. Actually, it worked out
Yeah.
really well. I got what I
Mm.
needed. I was able to do what I needed to do. And I feel a mastery over myself by saying, no, I can't do that actually.
Ooh. Yep. Yep. That's real. The feedback from the universe, once you put that
Yeah.
plan into action, like, no, I'm not going to say yes to everything anymore.
Mm,
Universe is like,
mm,
okay, I
mm,
support you in that. And then it's like kind of opens up from there. Yeah. I have found that to be the case too. Yeah.
mm.
And Jay says yoga. Yes. Yoga. Yep. Yep. Anything that kind of puts you back into your body, I think is key. Because, like you said, we'll be living up here with a lot of these attachment styles.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the great things about yoga is that it works on the lymphatic system. So when
Mm-hmm.
you're doing all your, I do kinetic yoga. So I do, they call it pyramid instead of like downward dog, and all these other things that correlate to some of the hieroglyphs that they found in. So they found
Oh,
that actually
really?
some of the yoga poses actually not originated, but maybe originated in Egypt, because you
Hmm.
find a lot of that, some of these poses in the hieroglyphs.
Oh,
You find some
wow.
some of the poses in the
That's
hieroglyphs.
interesting. Okay.
And so yoga is working also on your lymphatic system. And so it's getting all the debris
Mm.
out, and the breath as well. So one of the things that I talk about, like breathing from the diaphragm, is that it sends the diaphragm sends a message to your brain, and it it enacts the parasympathetic nervous system,
Mm-hmm.
which, when your parasympathetic nervous system is activated, you
Mm-hmm.
can't do fight, flight, or freeze. So you're not going to be, you're not running from the lion, you're not freezing up and all tense, and
Mm-hmm.
also you're not doing any of those things. And
Right.
so it enables you to remember. So you're going to remember that you need to use your affirmation that's on your fridge. You're going to remember to maybe take that deep breath before you say that thing that's going to blow up your household. Um, you know, and
Yes.
gives you the opportunity to check in with yourself. Is this the right thing that I should be doing?
Yeah.
Or is there something I should be saying in this moment that I'm not?
Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's key. Yep. And we have the
Mm.
ability to kind of like activate that. We don't have to live in survival mode. If we know, if we have our awareness, my body's reacting this way. I might be in survival mode, but I can always pivot. I can
Mm.
always reactivate my relaxed state, my parasympathetic nervous system.
Yeah, because
Power in that.
essentially you're
Mm-hmm.
telling your body, I am safe.
Yes. Yeah.
And so in the workshop, we're going to give people tools dependent on your attachment style about sending that message to yourself and to your body that you are safe in that moment.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. As we're wrapping up, I do want to ask you just about your services and offerings, and also what you do to help people build an emotional health plan before moving abroad. Because as we both know, like moving abroad can bring up a lot of unprocessed emotions, things you haven't thought about in years that happened in childhood. And a lot of us are not really prepared for that before we move abroad. So I would love to just ask about that service that you offer, helping people be prepared, take proactive action
Yeah.
when it comes to the emotional side of moving abroad.
Yeah. So really it's about, I suppose my coaching services are about your emotional well-being. You're taking this mammoth journey, you've made these decisions, you've decided to like really to pivot. And so for me, my thought is that there's two sides to this coin. One is, you get your money sorted, you get your, you
Yeah.
get like, where am I going to live? What, am I going to Iceland or am I going to Barbados? Like those
Mm-hmm.
practical things are really important. But one of the things that I've found in moving abroad is that once you've done that, then what?
Ooh.
And your body is, if you've been in kind of any kind of toxic work
Yes.
environment or toxic country where you're not valued, then there are certain things that your body is doing. And because I have a knowledge around hormones, your body is starting to live without adrenaline. Your body is beginning to live without cortisol.
Mm-hmm.
And your body is, and you may be at a point where you're like, well, what now? and I help women to look at the building blocks of the life that you're trying to curate, but also take a step back and
Mm-hmm.
actually say, well, how are you going? What's the journey to get from where you are to where you want to be? And that's an emotional journey. I do believe that's an emotional journey. So I do a lot of I've started to implement like a little quiz so that I can get to know like where people are coming from. I want to know if there's any neurodivergence, if there's what's your learning
Mm-hmm.
style. And I
Ooh.
think that um, doing individualized work with women around like what can you begin to implement today that's going to help you on your journey to this dream liberated life. And it can look in lots of ways. Some people come to me for actually a toolkit, so a real
Mm-hmm.
practical toolkit,
Right.
um, because you are going to have time and space. And some of these early childhood things will come to you like,
Yes, they
I
will.
didn't even know that this was still hanging around. I thought I'd
Uh-huh.
dealt with this.
Yes. Can
but in your
relate.
pre- but in your previous life, you were just busy.
Ooh, yep. Mm-hmm.
And so I can help women to create toolkits,
Mm-hmm.
and also to how do you incorporate that into your daily life, this new life? How do you incorporate that?
Yeah.
Where is the place of community? What are the things that you can do on a daily basis that are going to release dopamine, serotonin, that are going to keep your adrenaline levels low? What are some of the things that you are going to need to produce oxytocin? We need oxytocin. Those
Mm-hmm.
who have estrogen, we need oxytocin. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
working with you around what are you going to need to be able to produce those hormones that are going to keep you stable, emotionally
Ooh.
stable, while your
Mm-hmm.
body's going through. all of this, and to
Yes.
have fun, to repivot your life around the things that, maybe in your previous life you never got time to do. So
Mm-hmm.
how are you going to do that? What does your community look like? What do you need in community? But also, what do you bring to community? And sometimes, because these are not subjects that we think about, they're not things
They're
that we
not.
necessarily dwell on. So I kind of walk with people to kind of figure out, okay, so this is ideally going to be what's going to benefit you, given
Mm-hmm.
who you are, where you're coming from, what you're trying to achieve, and what the dream is. And so that's what I do in terms of the moving abroad piece. So in
Mm-hmm.
terms of the trauma piece and the life story piece, I think it's very personalized. It's very, very personalized, but there is like a program. So we look at the foundations of, like, where's your starting point? Who are you? What's the story that you're telling yourself? And the story that you're telling yourself, where does it show up? Where are some of the
Mm.
places that this story shows up? And
Mm-hmm.
we look at, like, things like when we're kids, we hear lots of things that adults
Yes.
say and that adults think that we don't hear. So trying to help people
Mm-hmm.
to figure out, well, where does that story come from? Is it
Right.
something you've heard? Is it something when you were pre-verbal, when you were pre-developed memory? Um, and we try and do those building blocks, and we actually try and bring to consciousness, like, well, is this story relevant?
Mm.
Is it your story today now, or is
Right.
this an old story? And helping people to develop strategies to be able to, you know slowly bring that old story out and bring the new story in.
Mm.
Um, and I know this sounds all esoteric and it's very difficult to conceptualize, but I think everyone has an individual story. And it
It's true.
and for me, if you come to me and you're someone who is neurodivergent, what I might do for you, so I mean someone who may be on the spectrum, someone
Yeah.
who might be newly diagnosed with ADHD, the
Yeah.
way that I work with you is going to be very different because I have to take all of that into account.
Mm.
So yeah, for me, it's helping people to discover their emotional landscape and to develop emotional literacy.
Yes.
That is where I'm at.
Mm. Beautiful. Beautiful. Yes.
That is where
Um,
I'm at.
yeah. And then how can people get into contact with you? I have your website up here, but yeah.
Yes, I have a website,
Mm-hmm.
and you can click to have a discovery call with me. Although I'm likely to be that might not no longer be an option because it takes up quite a lot of my time.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
Yep.
you can at the moment there is an option for you to have a discovery call, which is a 30-minute call where I want to know, um, are we the right fit?
Yes.
I want to know that you understand where I'm coming from and actually what I'm doing. And I get a bit of an understanding about what is it that you're trying to achieve. We then develop a program based on that, and for moving abroad, for the trauma work, and also for the life story work. So that's all in my website, that
Okay.
which
Yeah.
is there. Thank you.
Yes. You're welcome. You're welcome. Yes, yes, yes. But yeah, as for ending, read this last comment. Tea Time Beauty, hello. I'm glad I was able to make it for the live ending. Thank you for holding space for this very much needed chat. You're welcome. You're
Oh,
welcome. Thank you for being here.
thank you.
But yes, y'all, we have our workshop coming up, Healing from Childhood Attachment Wounds, January 23rd at 7 p.m. Eastern. And the recording will also be emailed to all attendees if you can't make it live.
Mhm.
But we would love to see you there. Use
Yes.
the link in the chat or the description to register. But yeah, I just want to thank you so much for being here, Angela, and for sharing everything that you've shared.
Mm.
I know that it's helped a lot of people. It's helped me just every time I talk to you. So thank you.
We
Thank
always
you.
have these aha moments, and I think,
We,
we've said in terms of our intention for the workshop, like, we just want that the women that attend get the aha moments and are able to join the dots of their own story, and actually
Yeah.
to find a way, or find a way through. Because, you know, this life can be amazing and can be wonderful, and with
Yeah.
some of these things, like, we can be well on our journey for that,
Hmm.
but thank you very much for having me and asking me to
You're
come on, and
welcome.
I'm so looking forward to you know, engaging in terms of this workshop, and
Yes.
thank you very much, guys.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you to everyone in the chat, everything you shared. And yeah, y'all, the educator. Thank you, ladies. Absolutely. Thank you always for being here, the
Thank
educator.
you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Until next time, y'all. Bye. Hope to see you on the 20th.
Hasta luego.
Bye.